You take a small plastic stick out of a box. You pee on it. You put it flat on the edge of the sink. And then you wait 2 minutes, staring at it like it owes you money. Now take all of that minus the stick, minus the box, minus the bathroom, minus the 2 minutes, minus any idea whatsoever of what's actually happening inside your body. That was pregnancy for most of human history. So how did a woman 3,000 years ago answer the single most life-changing question a body can ask? Seriously, sit with that for a second. No stick, no line, no doctor who could tell her anything she didn't already suspect. And yet, she had an answer. She had a test. And the strange part is, it worked. This isn't a story about superstition. That's the twist waiting for you. Because the method these women used is older than the pyramids you're picturing, older than the alphabet, older than almost every idea you think of as ancient. And by the end of this, you're going to see the thing sitting in your own bathroom cabinet a little differently, because it's doing the exact same job, chasing the exact same signal that a woman in the Nile Valley was chasing with a handful of grain. There are really two questions buried in this. The first is the obvious one. What did they actually do? And the second, the far more interesting one. How on earth did it work when they had no clue what a hormone was? Hold on to that second one. It's the whole game. To understand any of this, you have to picture the problem before the solution existed. Before you can test for pregnancy, you need a signal. Something in the body that changes when you're pregnant and doesn't when you're not. That sounds obvious to you because you grew up knowing the body is full of chemical messengers. They didn't. Picture a world with no concept of a hormone, no microscope, no blood work, nothing you could measure. A woman's own body was a sealed box. The first real sign most women got was months in, when it was already obvious to everyone. Waiting that long could mean the difference between preparing for a child and being caught completely off guard. So the question wasn't academic. It was survival, planning, sometimes life and death. And then, somewhere in ancient Egypt, someone found a crack in that sealed box. Here's what they did. We know this because it's written down. On Egyptian medical papyri, the clearest examples connected to texts like the Berlin Papyrus and the Kahun medical tradition, dated to somewhere around 1350 BC. The instruction is almost startlingly simple. A woman who thinks she might be pregnant takes 2 cloth bags, one holding barley, one holding emmer, the wheat the Egyptians actually grew, and every day she urinates on the grain. Then she watches. If the grain sprouts, she's pregnant. If nothing grows, she's not. That's it. That's the test. Pee on some seeds and wait. Now, your instinct right now is probably the same as mine was. Come on, that's a folk charm. That's rubbing a rabbit's foot. That cannot possibly work. Here's where it gets strange. Because in 1963, a group of researchers led by an Egyptian physician named Paul Galiongwe decided to actually try it. They published it in the journal Medical History. They took urine from pregnant women, from non-pregnant women, and from men, and they poured it onto barley and wheat seeds exactly the way the papyrus describes. The urine from men and non-pregnant women? The grain mostly sat there, dead. But the urine from pregnant women made the grain sprout in about 70% of cases, 28 out of 40 women. Read that again. A test written down before Moses, before Homer, before Rome existed, is right about 7 times out of 10. So why does it work? This is the part I love, because the Egyptians got the right answer for completely the wrong reason. They thought pregnancy carried a kind of life-giving force that made things grow, pure symbolism. Grain and fertility and the Nile all tangled together. They had no idea what was really going on. What was really going on is that a pregnant woman's urine is flooded with elevated hormones, estrogens, and those hormones can stimulate seeds to germinate faster. The grain wasn't reading her soul. It was reading her chemistry. Those 2 bags of barley and wheat were, in effect, the world's first biological pregnancy test. A living sensor, thousands of years before anyone had a word for what it was sensing. Think about that. They built a working hormone detector without knowing hormones existed. They just noticed, over generations of trial and error, that this thing tended to be true, and they were humble enough about it to write it down and keep using it. But now we hit the second claim, and this is where you have to be careful, because the ancient text goes one step further. It says the grain doesn't just tell you if you're pregnant, it tells you the sex of the baby. If the barley grows, it's a boy. If the emmer wheat grows, it's a girl. And it's tempting to just wave the whole thing through, since the first part checked out. It doesn't check out. This is the not X, it's Y moment. The pregnancy detection was real biology. The sex prediction was not. When Galileo Keynes-Weisstein looked at that part, there was no reliable link at all. A woman's hormones don't sort themselves into barley and wheat depending on the baby. That piece was symbolism, or wordplay in the ancient language, or just wishful pattern matching. Which is exactly why you can't judge the two claims together. One preserved a genuine observation. The other was a story people told themselves. Same test, two very different things going on. And the ancient mind didn't separate them because to them it was all one seamless idea. Now here's a question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If this test actually worked, even partly, what happened to it? Did it just vanish when Egypt fell? Not even close. And this is where the scale of it hits you. This wasn't a one-off written in one scroll and forgotten. The same basic idea of read the urine to read the pregnancy echoes forward through Greek and Roman medicine into the medical texts of the medieval Middle East and then further still. There's a version of this grain test sitting in a book of German folklore as late as 1699. 1699, that's more than 3,000 years after the papyrus, and women are still peeing on seeds. We've talked in other videos about how ancient knowledge usually dies in the dark, how organic things rot and get lost. This is the opposite. This is an idea so useful it refused to die for 3 millennia. And it gave rise to something wonderfully grim along the way. In medieval Europe, there were people whose entire job was to diagnose pregnancy and disease by staring at your urine. Their actual historical nickname? The piss prophets. They'd examine the color, sometimes mix it with wine to watch for a reaction. Was most of it nonsense? Absolutely. But sitting underneath the theatrics was the same 3,000-year-old hunch the Egyptians had. That the answer to the pregnancy question is dissolved in the urine if only you knew how to read it. Here's the thing though, asking did they have a pregnancy test might be slightly the wrong question, because what these people were really doing across all those centuries was hunting for a signal they could sense but couldn't name. The Egyptian with her grain, the piss prophet with his flask, they all knew something was in there, they just didn't have the eyes to see it directly. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end, because it's the strangest part of all of this. That signal they were all chasing, we finally caught it. In the 1920s, German scientists Selmar Aschheim and Bernhard Zondek figured out that pregnant urine contains a specific hormone we now call HCG. To test for it, they injected a woman's urine into an immature mouse and checked its ovaries. Then a British scientist, Lancelot Hobben, found you could do it with an African clawed frog instead. Inject the urine, and if she was pregnant, the frog laid eggs within hours. For decades in the 20th century, pregnancy tests ran on live frogs. Then, follow the line all the way to its end. In 1978, the first home pregnancy test appeared on drugstore shelves. That plastic stick you started with. And what is it actually doing? It is looking for a hormone in your urine that signals pregnancy. It is the exact same idea as 2 bags of grain in the Nile Valley in 1350 BC. We just finally learned to read the signal directly, instead of asking a seed or a frog to read it for us. So, how did ancient women do their pregnancy test? They took 2 bags of grain. They watered them day after day with their own bodies. And they watched for life to answer. It was clever. It was strange. And in the one part that mattered, it was right. Because without knowing a single thing about hormones, they'd found a way to make their own chemistry visible. They read the invisible with a handful of barley. From grain in 1350 BC to the piss prophets, to a frog in a lab, to a stick in your hand in 2 minutes. It's all one unbroken question, asked for 3,000 years. So the next time you're standing at that sink, staring down a little plastic stick, waiting for it to make up its mind, remember, you're not doing anything new. You're doing the oldest test there is. A woman was standing exactly where you are, asking exactly what you're asking 33 centuries ago. She just used barley.